It was a cold October night in the Pacific Northwest when a hiker named James caught something moving between the trees. At first, he thought it was a bear, until it stood up. Towering over 7 feet tall, covered in thick, matted hair, the creature locked eyes with him for what felt like an eternity before vanishing into the darkness. James swears to this day he wasn't imagining things, and he's not alone. Thousands of people across North America claim they've seen something just like it, a massive, elusive being that walks the line between myth and reality. They call it Bigfoot, but what if these encounters aren't just modern legends? What if they're echoes of something much older, stories passed down through generations, woven into the very fabric of Native American folklore? Long before grainy videos and blurry photographs, indigenous tribes spoke of giants lurking in the wilderness. The Salish people called them Sasquatch, the Oh-Mah knew them as Nika, and the Algonquian tribes told of the Wendigo. These weren't just monsters in campfire tales. They were part of a deeper understanding of the natural world, a bridge between the seen and the unseen. So where does the truth lie? In this video, we're diving into the shadows where history, science, and myth collide. We'll explore ancient accounts that predate modern sightings, examine the scientific theories trying to explain the unexplainable, and uncover how Bigfoot became a cornerstone of cryptid culture. Whether you're a skeptic or a true believer, one thing's certain: the mystery of Bigfoot is far more than just a tall tale. It's a puzzle that stretches back centuries, and we're just beginning to piece it together. Long before Bigfoot became a pop culture phenomenon, indigenous peoples wove intricate tales of towering, hairy beings into their oral traditions. Among the Salish tribes of the Pacific Northwest, the word Sasq'ets, later anglicized to Sasquatch, described a wild man who dwelled deep in the forests, a figure both feared and respected. These weren't just stories to frighten children, they carried weight, serving as warnings or lessons about the untamed wilderness. The Salish believed these creatures were guardians of the land, disappearing into the mist when humans encroached too far, as if the earth itself was reclaiming its protectors. Further south, the Cherokee spoke of the Tsul Kalu, a colossal, hairy giant said to live in the Appalachian Mountains. Unlike modern Bigfoot depictions, Tsul Kalu was often described as more than just an animal. It possessed intelligence, even wisdom. Some legends say it taught humans how to hunt, while others warn it would steal those who disrespect the forest. The Hoopa tribe of Northern California told of the Oh-Mah, creatures so tied to the land that their footsteps could trigger earthquakes. These weren't random monsters. They were woven into creation stories, explanations for natural phenomena, and moral codes about living in harmony with nature. What's striking is how these accounts, separated by thousands of miles and distinct cultures, share eerily similar details. The descriptions of towering height, pungent odor, and uncanny vocalizations echo across tribal histories. Some anthropologists suggest these legends might have roots in encounters with an unknown primate, while others argue they symbolize humanity's primal fear and fascination with the wild. Either way, one thing is clear: the idea of a hidden, human-like creature lurking beyond the campfire light is far older and far deeper than any roadside attraction or blurry photograph. For the Sasq'ets people of the Coast Salish, the Sasq'ets wasn't just a creature, it was a spirit woven into the land itself. Unlike the towering, beast-like figure of modern Bigfoot lore, their stories describe something far more mysterious, a shapeshifter capable of moving between worlds. Some elders say it could appear as a man one moment and vanish into the trees the next, leaving only the scent of wet earth and cedar behind. These encounters weren't merely sightings, they were lessons. The Sasq'ets served as a guardian, a reminder that the wilderness demanded respect. Stsale's oral traditions tell of hunters who stumbled upon its territory, only to find their weapons mysteriously broken or their paths twisted back to where they began, a clear warning against greed or overhunting. One particularly chilling account, passed down through generations, describes a group of children who wandered too far into the forest. As dusk fell, they heard a deep, humming chant echoing through the trees, a sound unlike any animal they knew. When they turned to flee, the shadows seemed to shift around them, guiding them back to the village unharmed. To the Stsales, this wasn't a predator stalking the lost, it was the land itself intervening, with the Sasq'ets as its voice. What makes these stories so compelling is how they blur the line between physical and spiritual. The Sasq'ets wasn't just a cryptid, it was a bridge between the human world and the unseen forces that shaped it. Some anthropologists speculate these tales may have roots in early encounters with reclusive, possibly now extinct hominids. But for the Stsales, the deeper truth lies in the symbolism. The Sasq'ets embodies the consequences of imbalance, a living reminder that nature isn't something to conquer, but to coexist with. Even today, elders caution that disturbing sacred sites or taking more than the land offers might just summon the Sasq'ets back, not as a monster, but as a teacher. Deep in the misty peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, the Cherokee tell of a being as old as the stones themselves. Tsul Kalu, the slant-eyed giant, wasn't just a creature of brute force, but a complex figure straddling the line between teacher and trickster. Described as taller than the oldest pines and covered in shaggy hair, its most striking feature was its eyes, set at a slant, almost glowing with an otherworldly knowledge. Unlike modern portrayals of Bigfoot as a silent wanderer, Tsul Kalu spoke, its voice rumbling like distant thunder, and it wielded a strange, almost playful cunning. Some legends say it taught hunters how to track deer by softening their moccasins with river clay, while others warn it would lead the greedy astray, leaving them lost in the woods until they learned humility. One particularly haunting tale recounts a group of warriors who boasted they could outsmart the giant. Tsul Kalu challenged them to a game of stickball, a sacred Cherokee sport, but as they played, the ground beneath them began to shift. The giant's laughter echoed as the men realized they'd been lured into a sinkhole, their arrogance swallowing them whole. Yet, the story doesn't end as a mere cautionary tale. When the warriors finally admitted defeat, Tsul Kalu lifted them out, leaving them with a lesson. Strength without respect is meaningless. This duality, part guardian, part prankster, sets Tsul Kalu apart from other cryptids. It wasn't just a monster, it was a mirror, reflecting the virtues and flaws of those who crossed its path. What's fascinating is how these ancient accounts eerily align with modern Appalachian Bigfoot sightings. Reports describe a figure that doesn't just flee but sometimes watches, even interacts. In the 1970s, a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains swore he saw a massive, hairy figure kneeling by a creek, cupping water in its hands before locking eyes with him and vanishing uphill, an image that could have been pulled straight from Cherokee oral history. Whether these encounters are glimpses of an undiscovered primate or something far older, the Tsul Kalu legends suggest one thing: the Appalachian wilderness has always held secrets, and some of them might still be walking among us. In the dense redwood forests of Northern California, the Hoopa people whisper of the Oh-Mah, a creature so feared, parents would warn their children not to stray too far after sunset. Unlike the solitary wanderers of other Bigfoot legends, the Oh-Mah was said to lurk in the darkness of caves, emerging only at night with glowing eyes that cut through the fog. Descriptions paint it as bulkier than modern Sasquatch depictions, with arms so long they could drag the ground, and a stench like rotting meat clinging to its fur. But what made the Oh-Mah truly terrifying wasn't just its appearance. It was its hunger for human flesh, particularly children who wandered alone. Tribal elders spoke of entire villages keeping watchfires burning through the night, believing the light would keep the creature at bay. One chilling Hoopa account tells of a group of children playing near a creek who suddenly fell silent. When the villagers investigated, they found tiny footprints leading into the forest, but alongside them, massive, clawed tracks sunk deep into the mud. The children were never seen again. To this day, some Hoopa avoid certain caves, convinced the Oh-Mah still waits in the shadows. Yet there's a twist to these stories. The Oh-Mah wasn't just a mindless predator. Some legends suggest it punished those who broke tribal laws, almost like a twisted enforcer of justice. A hunter who took more deer than needed might find his campsite ravaged by something far stronger than a bear, or wake to the sound of guttural growls echoing from the tree line. Modern Bigfoot reports from the same region share eerie overlaps with these ancient tales. Witnesses describe a pungent, musky odor preceding encounters, just as the Hoopa warned. Nighttime sightings often mention glowing eyes reflecting flashlight beams, and a few even report hearing strange, almost vocal sounds, not quite growls, but something closer to distorted speech. Could these be fleeting glimpses of the same creature the Hoopa knew, or is something deeper at work, a shared human instinct to personify the dangers of the wild? Whether the Oh-Mah was flesh and blood or something more spectral, one thing is certain: for the Hoopa, it was never just a monster. It was a reminder that the forest holds rules older than human law, and not all of them are kind. When European settlers arrived in North America, they brought with them centuries of folklore about wild, hairy beings lurking just beyond the edges of civilization. To the Norse, they were the Huljufolk, hidden people who dwelled in forests and mountains, rarely seen but deeply feared. The Greeks told tales of satyrs, half-man, half-beast creatures that danced at the fringes of human society. And in the Black Forest of Germany, stories of the Wilden Man, a towering, fur-covered figure, sent chills down the spines of villagers. So when colonists heard indigenous accounts of giants roaming the wilderness, it wasn't entirely unfamiliar territory. But what happened next wasn't just cultural exchange. It was a collision of myths, reshaping Bigfoot lore into something entirely new. Early settler diaries and letters reveal a mix of fascination and terror. In the 1700s, a French trapper in the Great Lakes region wrote of encountering les hommes des bois, wild men of the woods, whose descriptions borrowed equally from Algonquian legends and European fairy tales. Some accounts even merged biblical imagery, likening these creatures to the cursed descendants of Cain, wandering the earth as monstrous outcasts. This blending of traditions created a hybrid mythology, where the Sasquatch of indigenous stories gained the supernatural overtones of European folklore. A missionary's journal from 1842 describes a creature with the strength of 10 men and the cunning of the devil, a far cry from the more nuanced guardians described by native tribes. The transformation didn't stop there. By the late 19th century, newspapers and dime novels sensationalized these encounters, turning cryptic forest dwellers into headline-grabbing monsters. A particularly infamous article in the 1891 San Francisco Chronicle claimed miners in the Sierra Nevadas had been harried by a tribe of hairy giants, complete with exaggerated sketches of ape-like creatures wielding clubs, an image ripped straight from medieval depictions of wild men. This wasn't just storytelling, it was a calculated distortion, framing indigenous lore through a lens of colonial fear and exoticism. Yet beneath the sensationalism, echoes of older truths persisted. In remote logging camps, settlers swapped tales of eerie howls in the night or footprints too large to belong to any bear details that mirrored native accounts with uncanny precision. Even the name Bigfoot emerged from this cultural melting pot, coined in the 1950s after a series of plaster casts from Northern California matched no known animal. But the creature those tracks belonged to wasn't just a physical being. It was a patchwork of centuries of human imagination, fear, and wonder. Whether European colonists realized it or not, they weren't just importing their myths. They were stepping into a story far older than their own, one that the land itself had been telling long before they arrived. By the early 19th century, newspapers had discovered something powerful. Bigfoot sold copies. What began as whispers in frontier towns soon exploded into full-blown media spectacles, blurring the line between fact and fiction with every exaggerated headline. Take the 1818 Quebec Gazette's account of the Wild Man of the Woods, a story so lurid, it might as well have been penned by a novelist. According to the article, farmers near St. John's had stumbled upon a 7-foot-tall creature covered in black fur, with eyes that glowed like hot coals. It allegedly carried off livestock and left footprints as wide as a dinner plate. Never mind that no one could produce a shred of physical evidence. The tales spread like wildfire, reprinted in papers from Boston to London, each retelling adding new, outlandish details. Then came 1893's Jacko scandal. The Victoria Daily Colonist ran a front-page story claiming railroad workers in British Columbia had captured a half-human, half-beast in the mountains. Described as 4 feet tall with long, matted hair and unnatural strength, Jacko supposedly escaped after biting through its ropes, though not before the paper published a sketch so dubious it looked like a circus poster. Later investigations revealed the entire story was fabricated, likely to boost circulation during a slow news cycle, but the damage was done. Jacko became shorthand for Bigfoot hysteria, proof that spectacle could overshadow skepticism. These hoaxes did more than entertain, they rewrote the rules of the myth. Indigenous stories had treated creatures like the Sasquatch with reverence, but newspapers turned them into clickbait of the Victorian era, monsters to be feared or mocked. Reporters cribbed freely from native folklore, stripping away cultural context and repackaging it as frontier adventure. An 1875 piece in the Oregonian even claimed a tribe of ape men was stealing settlers' tools, a narrative that conveniently justified displacing indigenous communities by painting the wilderness as dangerously inhuman. Yet buried beneath the sensationalism, glimmers of truth persisted. Loggers in the Pacific Northwest swapped stories of eerie whistles in the night, while hunters reported finding tracks too large for bears, details that mirrored tribal accounts with uncanny precision. The difference was intent. Where native traditions saw mystery and meaning, newspapers saw profit. By the turn of the century, Bigfoot wasn't just a legend, it was a commodity, its story shaped less by encounters and more by the ink-stained hands of editors chasing headlines. And that legacy, the tension between myth and manipulation, still haunts every blurry photo and eyewitness account today. October 20th, 1967. A stretch of wilderness along Bluff Creek in Northern California. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, 2 men with a 16mm camera, were about to capture what would become the most debated piece of footage in cryptozoology history. The film lasts less than a minute, but its impact has endured for decades, a grainy, shaky sequence of something massive and hairy striding purposefully across a clearing. It's become known as the Patterson-Gimlin Film, and whether you think it's genuine or a hoax, one thing's undeniable: it changed Bigfoot lore forever. What makes this footage so compelling isn't just the creature itself, but the conditions under which it was filmed. The weather was overcast, the light flat, hardly ideal for clarity. Patterson, riding horseback, struggled to steady the camera as he dismounted, resulting in the now iconic shaky frame. Yet despite the technical limitations, the details are startling. The figure, later nicknamed Patty by researchers, moves with an uncanny fluidity, its musculature visible beneath a layer of dark hair. Its gait isn't the lumbering shuffle of a man in a suit. It's smooth, almost deliberate, with a mid-step pause where it glances directly at the camera. That moment, frozen in grainy frames, burns into the memory. There's something about the tilt of its head, the way its shoulders roll, that feels unsettlingly real. Skeptics, of course, have dissected every pixel. Some claim it's a man in an elaborate ape suit, pointing to the era's advances in Hollywood costuming. Others argue the proportions are off, the arms too long, the stride too exaggerated. But here's where things get interesting. Biomechanics experts have analyzed the movement, and many agree, replicating that gait would require an understanding of anatomy beyond what was available in the 60s. The way Patty's calf muscles flex, the subtle rotation of its hips, these aren't the movements of someone clomping around in rubber feet. Even the suit theory falters when you consider the technology of the time. The most advanced gorilla costumes, like those in Planet of the Apes, still had visible seams and stiff, unnatural mobility. Patty's flesh appears to ripple. Then there's the context. Patterson and Gimlin weren't seasoned filmmakers, they were amateurs with a passion for Bigfoot. Patterson had even published a book on the subject, leading some to cry foul motivation, they argue, to stage a hoax. But if it was a hoax, why hasn't anyone convincingly recreated it? Despite countless attempts, no reproduction has matched the original's eerie authenticity. Even the late Bob Aronimus, who claimed to be the man in the suit, couldn't replicate the movement convincingly when asked to walk the same path decades later. Perhaps the film's greatest legacy is how it polarizes. For believers, it's the smoking gun, proof that something unexplained walks the woods. For skeptics, it's a masterclass in wishful thinking. But beyond the debate, the Patterson-Gimlin film did something profound. It cemented Bigfoot in the modern imagination. Before 1967, Bigfoot was a regional curiosity. After a global phenomenon, whether it's real or not, Patty's brief stroll through that clearing ensured one thing: the mystery would outlive the men who filmed it. The scientific community has long approached Bigfoot with skepticism, not out of stubborn disbelief, but because extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and so far, the evidence hasn't convinced most biologists. One major hurdle is the fossil record. North America's ecosystems have been meticulously studied for centuries, yet no fossils of a giant, undiscovered primate have ever surfaced. If a creature like Bigfoot existed, even in the distant past, paleontologists argue we'd have found bones or teeth by now, just as we have for ancient mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and even early humans. The absence is glaring, especially considering how frequently these creatures are supposedly sighted. Then there's the problem of population. For a species to survive, it needs a viable breeding group, hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals to maintain genetic diversity. Yet no one has ever stumbled upon a Bigfoot nest, carcass, or juvenile. no scat has been definitively linked to an unknown primate. No hair samples hold DNA that can't be explained by known animals. Ecologists point out that a population large enough to sustain itself would leave traces impossible to miss: feeding grounds, territorial markings, or even just the occasional bones of the deceased. The wilderness is vast, but not so vast that something this big could vanish without leaving a shred of biological proof. Many sightings, scientists argue, can be chalked up to misidentification. A black bear standing on its hind legs in poor light checks all the boxes: towering height, shaggy silhouette, and even the illusion of human-like movement. Throw in shadows, adrenaline, and the power of suggestion, and it's easy to see how a startled hiker might swear they saw something more. Even vocalizations attributed to Bigfoot, deep howls, eerie whistles often match known animals like coyotes, foxes, or even the creaking of trees in wind. Hoaxes muddy the waters further. From the infamous Patterson-Gimlin film to modern-day pranksters in gorilla suits, the history of Bigfoot is littered with staged evidence. Footprints can be carved, photos can be doctored, and stories can be embellished. This doesn't mean every witness is lying, but it does make it harder to separate signal from noise. Yet not all scientists dismiss the possibility outright. Primatologist Dr. Jane Goodall, renowned for her work with chimpanzees, has famously said she keeps an open mind. In interviews, she's recounted conversations with indigenous elders whose detailed descriptions of Sasquatch-like creatures align eerily with other reports. "I'm not going to say it exists," she's cautioned, "but I'm not going to say it doesn't." Her stance isn't endorsement, it's acknowledgement that the natural world still holds mysteries. After all, new species are discovered every year, from deep-sea creatures to jungle insects. Could a relict hominid still roam remote forests? The odds are slim, but science thrives on curiosity. Until concrete evidence emerges, though, Bigfoot remains where it's always been, in the shadowy border between myth and possibility. North America's wilderness stretches across millions of acres, dense forests, uncharted caves, and mountain ranges so remote, satellite images still reveal pockets labeled unexplored. It's not just empty space, it's a living, breathing frontier where nature keeps its secrets close. Consider this: in the last 2 decades alone, scientists have cataloged over 300 new species in the Pacific Northwest, from glow-in-the-dark fungi to a ghostly, translucent salamander hidden deep in Oregon's lava tubes. If something so delicate could evade detection for centuries, what else might be out there? Then there's the ocean's lesson, the giant squid. For generations, sailors spun tales of tentacled monsters dragging ships into the depths, myths dismissed as fantasy until the 1870s, when the first carcasses washed ashore. Even then, it took another 130 years for scientists to capture footage of a living giant squid in its natural habitat. If an animal that massive could hide in plain sight, camouflaged by the vastness of its environment, why couldn't a land-dwelling primate do the same? But the most tantalizing theory comes from anthropology, not cryptozoology. It's called the ghost lineage hypothesis. Fossil records show that multiple hominid species once roamed North America, like the towering Gigantopithecus, an ancient ape that stood over 10 feet tall and vanished roughly 100,000 years ago, officially, at least. Some researchers argue that relic populations could have survived in isolated refuges, evolving in pockets of wilderness untouched by time. Indigenous oral histories often describe creatures with strikingly similar traits, raising the question: are these legends cultural memories of real encounters passed down through generations? The Amazon offers a modern parallel. In 2017, researchers discovered a new species of tapir, a 300-pound mammal, despite the region being scoured by biologists for centuries. If a creature that size could go unnoticed in the world's most studied rainforest, the possibility of an undiscovered primate in North America's old-growth forests isn't just speculative, it's a reminder of how much we still don't know. Critics counter that Bigfoot's sheer size would make it impossible to miss, but consider the mountain gorilla. Until 1902, science dismissed it as folklore. Even now, with fewer than 1,000 left, researchers can spend months in their habitat without a single sighting. The difference: gorillas don't want to be found. If Bigfoot shares even a fraction of that elusiveness, combined with the sheer scale of its potential territory, the lack of definitive proof starts to feel less like a refutation and more like a challenge. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, not a literal missing link, but a metaphor for what wilderness still represents, the unknown that lingers at the edges of our maps. Whether Bigfoot exists as flesh and blood or as a symbol, its persistence in our stories speaks to something primal, the thrill of realizing we haven't tamed the world, not entirely. And perhaps that's the most compelling argument of all. Some of the most chilling Bigfoot encounters don't involve sightings at all, just sound. Witnesses often describe a guttural roar or deep, rhythmic knocking that seems to vibrate through their bones, leaving them inexplicably shaken. Scientists might have an explanation for this primal reaction, and it lies in a phenomenon called infrasound, frequencies too low for human ears to detect, yet powerful enough to trigger instinctive terror. Elephants use infrasound to communicate across miles of savanna, their calls rumbling below 20 Hz, the threshold of human hearing, but at close range, those same frequencies can induce dizziness, nausea, and even a paralyzing sense of dread. It's a survival tactic, a way to ward off threats without physical confrontation. Bigfoot reports share uncanny similarities. Take the infamous Sierra sounds, recorded in the 1970s in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. Hunters captured what they claimed were Sasquatch vocalizations, a mix of growls, whoops, and something far stranger, pulses of sound that made their recording equipment spike, even when the forest fell silent. Audio analysts later confirmed the presence of infrasound waves embedded in the recordings, frequencies that could theoretically trigger unease in anyone nearby. Then there's the physiological impact. Studies on infrasound exposure show it can cause everything from heightened anxiety to visual disturbances, exactly the symptoms described by witnesses who report feeling watched before an encounter. A logger in Washington state once swore he heard a deep hum moments before spotting a massive figure moving through the trees. His account mirrors military research on infrasound weapons, which weaponize low frequencies to disorient targets. Nature, it seems, got there first, but here's where it gets murkier. If Bigfoot uses infrasound as a defense mechanism, that implies an advanced understanding of bioacoustics knowledge beyond any known animal's capabilities. Native legends might hold clues. The SDSAs describe the Sasq'ets emitting a song that bends the air, a description eerily close to modern infrasound research. Whether this is evolutionary adaptation or something more mythic remains unanswered. What's certain is that these encounters tap into something primal, a frequency of fear written deep in our DNA. When witnesses say the forest fell silent before they heard it, they're not just describing sound, they're describing the eerie quiet before a storm, the hush that tells every creature to hide. And in that silence, even science starts to feel like folklore. By the mid-20th century, Bigfoot had begun its transformation from regional legend to full-blown cultural phenomenon. But it wasn't just eyewitness accounts driving the shift. Hollywood played a pivotal role, reshaping the creature from a shadowy forest dweller into something far more complex. The 1958 film The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas might not have featured Bigfoot directly, but its premise, a scientific expedition hunting a mythical beast, set the template for decades of cryptid storytelling. Suddenly, the idea of a hidden, humanoid creature wasn't just folklore, it was box office gold. Then came Harry and the Hendersons in 1987, a film that flipped the script entirely. No longer a monster to be feared, Bigfoot, or Harry, as the family affectionately named him, became a lovable misfit, a gentle giant struggling to navigate suburban life. The movie's genius lay in its humanity. Harry wasn't just a costume, he was a character with quirks, emotions, and even comedic timing. His bond with the Hendersons turned Bigfoot into a symbol of misunderstood difference, a far cry from the eerie, elusive figure of indigenous legends. The film's success didn't just entertain, it rewrote public perception, proving that Bigfoot could be as endearing as it was mysterious. Television took the baton next, with shows like In Search Of, and later Finding Bigfoot, blending documentary-style investigations with reality TV drama. Finding Bigfoot, which aired from 2011 to 2018, turned cryptid hunting into a team sport. Each episode followed researchers as they analyzed footprints, played alleged Sasquatch vocalizations, and camped out in hotspots like the forests of Oregon or the swamps of Louisiana. The show's formula, part science, part spectacle, drew millions of viewers, even as critics dismissed it as pseudoscience. Yet its legacy is undeniable. It made Bigfoot hunting a communal activity, something audiences could debate over social media or even try themselves on weekend camping trips. Meanwhile, Bigfoot's image kept evolving in commercials, cartoons, and even sports mascots, from the tongue-in-cheek Jack Link's beef jerky ads featuring a Sasquatch pranking campers, to the University of California's costumed Big Oski prowling football sidelines. These portrayals stripped away the creature's menace, replacing it with a wink and a nudge. But the irony is this: the more Bigfoot became a punchline, the harder it was to dismiss entirely. Because beneath the merchandise and memes, the core mystery remained. What's fascinating is how this pop culture reinvention never fully erased the older, darker versions of the legend. For every Harry and the Hendersons, there's a film like exists, a 2014 horror flick that portrayed Bigfoot as a vengeful, territorial force, a callback to the Hoopa tribe's Oh-Mah. Even Finding Bigfoot couldn't resist episodes where night vision cameras captured eerie silhouettes or distant howls sent the crew scrambling. This duality, the tension between Bigfoot as family friend and primal terror, speaks to something deeper. Maybe we need our monsters to be both, comforting enough to laugh at, but terrifying enough to remind us the wild still holds secrets we can't control. The ultimate testament to Bigfoot's cultural staying power, it's become a mirror. Depending on the era, the creature reflects our fears of the unknown, our longing for connection, or even our skepticism about what's real. Indigenous stories saw it as a guardian, settlers framed it as a threat, Hollywood turned it into a star, yet through every reinvention, one thread remains: the woods feel different when you think something might be watching. And as long as that thrill lingers, Bigfoot, whether myth, metaphor, or missing link, isn't going anywhere. Willow Creek, California, calls itself the Bigfoot capital of the world, and for good reason. Drive down its main street, and you'll see murals of towering, hairy figures peering from building walls. gift shops sell plaster casts of oversized footprints, and the local diner serves up a Sasquatch burger with extra-large portions. But this isn't just quirky small-town charm. It's a carefully crafted economy built on the back of a legend. Every year, thousands of visitors flock to Willow Creek, not to hunt for Bigfoot, but to immerse themselves in the myth. The town's annual Bigfoot Days festival draws crowds with costume contests, live music, and a parade featuring a 15-foot-tall Sasquatch float. Local guides offer expeditions into the nearby Six Rivers National Forest, armed with thermal cameras and anecdotes about famous sightings. For a fee, you too can spend a night in the woods, listening for knocks on trees or distant howls. The financial impact is undeniable. Hotels book up months in advance during peak seasons, and the town's Bigfoot Museum, packed with artifacts like the original Patterson-Gimlin film camera and alleged hair samples, has become a must-see stop. Even the skeptical can't resist snapping selfies with the giant wooden Bigfoot statue outside. But Willow Creek isn't alone. Across North America, towns with even tenuous ties to Sasquatch lore have leaned into the trend. In Honobia, Oklahoma, population 200, the annual Bigfoot Festival doubles the town's size overnight, with vendors selling everything from handmade carvings to, I believe, T-shirts. In Portland, Oregon, companies offer guided night hikes through the Columbia River Gorge, where the dense foliage and occasional elk calls make it easy to imagine something larger lurking just out of sight. Critics argue this commercialism cheapens the mystery, turning sacred indigenous legends into roadside attractions. Yet for many communities, Bigfoot tourism is survival. In places battered by logging declines or shrinking populations, embracing cryptid culture has revived main streets. The town of Felton, California, once struggling after its railroad industry collapsed, now thrives thanks to the Bigfoot Discovery Museum, a labor of love by a local researcher who turned his lifelong obsession into a community anchor. Even academic conferences have gotten in on the action, with universities hosting Sasquatch summits, where biologists and anthropologists debate evidence alongside amateur enthusiasts. The irony: the more Bigfoot becomes a commodity, the harder it is to separate fact from folklore. A guide in Willow Creek might jokingly rustle bushes to give tourists a thrill, while across the country, a Pennsylvania campground charges extra for Sasquatch sighting guarantees. But beneath the gimmicks, there's a deeper truth. People don't come just for the monster. They come for the possibility, the chance to stand in the same redwoods where Roger Patterson filmed his famous footage, or to stare into the darkness and wonder, just for a moment, if the legend might be real. And as long as that wonder persists, so will the towns betting their futures on the idea that Bigfoot is more than just a story. It's an experience. In 1958, a construction worker named Ray Wallace left behind more than just his tools in the dense forests of Northern California. He left a footprint. Literally, after reports of giant tracks near a logging site in Humboldt County made headlines, Wallace's family later revealed the truth. He'd carved a set of wooden feet, strapped them to his boots, and stomped through the mud as a prank. What started as a joke spiraled into legend when the media ran with the story, turning Wallace's fake tracks into the foundation of modern Bigfoot lore. The irony: Wallace never intended to create a myth. He just wanted to spook his coworkers. But once the world latched onto the idea, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Decades later, another scam would prove just how lucrative the Bigfoot industry had become. In 2012, self-proclaimed monster hunter Rick Dyer announced he'd achieved the impossible. He'd not only found Bigfoot, but he'd killed it, storing the body in a freezer for scientific study. He even released a blurry photo of a hairy, ape-like figure under a sheet, claiming DNA testing would confirm its authenticity. The media frenzy was instantaneous. News outlets worldwide covered the story, and Dyer sold exclusive interviews for thousands of dollars. There was just one problem: it was all a lie. The corpse turned out to a rubber costume purchased online, stuffed with animal entrails for realism. When confronted, Dyer admitted the hoax but shrugged it off, telling reporters, "People want to believe, I just gave them a show." These hoaxes share a disturbing common thread: exploitation. Wallace's prank tapped into a growing cultural obsession, while Dyer's scheme preyed on the public's thirst for validation. Both men understood that Bigfoot wasn't just a creature, it was a commodity. The more elusive the proof, the more people would pay for even a whiff of it, and they weren't alone. From the Georgia Bigfoot corpse of 28, actually a gorilla suit stuffed with roadkill, to the countless YouTube channels staging encounters for clicks, the cycle repeats. Each hoax erodes trust, making it harder for genuine researchers to be taken seriously. Yet the fallout isn't just skepticism, it's cultural theft. Wallace's tracks directly borrowed from indigenous descriptions of Sasquatch, stripping them of their sacred context and turning them into a punchline. Dyer's freezer stunt trivialized generations of native oral histories, reducing something profound to a cheap sideshow. The damage lingers. Every staged photo or fabricated footprint doesn't just mislead, it drowns out the voices of those who have shared these stories long before Bigfoot became a tourist trap. But here's the twist: hoaxes don't kill the myth, they feed it. For every exposed lie, a dozen new theories sprout. Maybe Wallace's prints were real, and his confession was the cover-up. Perhaps Dyer's fake was a distraction from the real specimen hidden elsewhere. The legend bends but never breaks, because its power was never about evidence, it's about wonder. And in a world where everything feels mapped and explained, that's the one thing no hoax can counterfeit. Imagine hiking alone at dusk when a gnarled tree stump suddenly seems to twist toward you. Your pulse spikes before you realize it's just a trick of the fading light. That instant misinterpretation has a name: pareidolia, our brain's hardwired habit of finding familiar shapes in randomness. It's why we see faces in clouds or the man in the moon. In Bigfoot's case, this quirk of perception transforms swaying branches into lurking figures or moss-covered rocks into hunched shoulders. The darker and denser the forest, the more our minds race to fill the gaps. Dr. David Clark, a folklore researcher, notes that nearly 70% of reported Sasquatch sightings occur in low-light conditions where shadows stretch and depth perception falters. One moment, you're scanning a quiet grove, the next, your brain screams, "Predator," not because something's there, but because evolution has trained us to err on the side of panic. Sleep paralysis adds another layer to these encounters. Picture waking in your tent, unable to move, as a hulking silhouette looms at the flap, a phenomenon reported by campers from the Adirondacks to the Olympic Peninsula. Neuroscientists explain this as a glitch between sleep stages. Your brain wakes but your body remains paralyzed, often conjuring hallucinations rooted in primal fears. Indigenous tales of night spirits pressing on chests align eerily with modern accounts of campers feeling an unseen presence nearby, the darker twist. These visions often borrow details from local lore. In areas with strong Bigfoot legends, sleep paralysis figures tend to be tall, hairy, and silent, proof that culture shapes even our nightmares. Then there's expectant attention, the psychological state where anticipation alters perception. hunters scouting for deer often report glimpsing Bigfoot precisely because they're hyper-focused on movement. A 2018 study in the Journal of Cognitive Psychology found that subjects primed with Sasquatch stories were 3 times more likely to spot one in ambiguous forest footage compared to a control group. This bias isn't just visual. Auditory pareidolia plays a role too. Wind through pine needles becomes whispered language, and distant owl hoots morph into unearthly vocalizations. Even seasoned outdoorsmen aren't immune. Take the case of a wildlife biologist in British Columbia who swore he heard rhythmic knocking, only to later discover it was a woodpecker drumming on a hollow log. Yet dismissing sightings as mere misperception misses a crucial point: the emotional weight of these experiences. When a witness describes locking eyes with something in the woods, their terror or awe is real, regardless of what actually triggered it. That visceral reaction lingers, shaping stories passed between campfires and YouTube comment sections alike. The forest has always been a Rorschach test for our deepest anxieties. Whether Bigfoot exists or not, the fact that so many people believe they've seen it reveals something far more fascinating. Our minds are wilder than any wilderness. In the summer of 1974, a package arrived at the FBI's headquarters in Washington, D.C. Inside, wrapped in wax paper and labeled with urgent handwriting, was a clump of coarse, reddish-brown hair. The accompanying letter insisted the sample came from a Sasquatch killed in rural Washington state, and the sender, a man who claimed to be a retired police officer, demanded the Bureau analyze it. What happened next would fuel conspiracy theories for decades. The FBI ran the tests. Agents even documented the process in a memo, confirming the hair didn't match any known North American mammal. But here's where things get murky. The file was stamped secret, buried in archives for 40 years, and only released under public records requests in 2019. To believers, this wasn't just bureaucracy, it was proof of a cover-up. The notion of government secrecy around Bigfoot isn't new. In the 1950s, rumors swirled that military pilots had spotted giant, hairy humanoids in Alaska's wilderness, prompting classified briefings at the Pentagon. A declassified Air Force memo from 1959 references unidentified bipedal creatures near missile bases, though it's worth noting the Cold War-era bred paranoia about Soviet experiments. Then there's the infamous Alaska film, a supposed 1972 military reconnaissance clip that allegedly shows a group of towering figures crossing a snowfield. The footage has never been verified, but its legend persists in cryptid circles, often cited alongside claims that agencies like the CIA have confiscated evidence to prevent panic. Ufology only deepened the intrigue. In the late 1970s, a fringe theory emerged linking Bigfoot to extraterrestrials, the idea that Sasquatch wasn't an undiscovered ape, but an alien hybrid or even a biological drone left to monitor Earth. Proponents point to bizarre details in some sightings: glowing red eyes, sudden disappearances, or even alleged telepathic communication. One particularly wild account from a Montana rancher in 1983 describes a Sasquatch vanishing in a flash of blue light, moments before a silent, disc-shaped object shot into the sky. Such stories found traction in UFO communities, especially after former government insiders like Bob Lazar, controversial for his claims about reverse engineering alien tech, hinted at classified connections between cryptids and off-world beings. Mainstream science dismisses these theories as fantasy, but the cultural impact is undeniable. The same era that gave us Project Blue Book also birthed the idea of a cryptid black ops unit, a shadowy team supposedly tasked with containing evidence of creatures like Bigfoot. Conspiracy forums lit up in 2014 when a supposed NSA leak referenced Project Harvester, an alleged program to track anomalous biological entities. The document was quickly debunked as a hoax, yet the allure remains. What's revealing is how these narratives mirror older indigenous beliefs. The Lummi tribe of the Pacific Northwest, for example, speaks of the Sasquatch, a race of hairy giants said to descend from the stars. In their stories, these beings arrived in smoking canoes, a phrase some interpret as spacecraft, long before Europeans. Modern conspiracy theories might repackage these ideas with government files and sci-fi jargon, but the core question endures: why would authorities hide the truth? For skeptics, the answer is simple: there's nothing to hide. For believers, the lack of evidence is the evidence. After all, if Bigfoot doesn't exist, why would the FBI bother testing that hair in the first place? In the frozen vastness of Canada's Yukon Territory, where the winter wind howls like a living thing, the stories aren't about towering apemen, they're about something far colder. Meet the Wahila, a creature so unlike the classic Bigfoot that it forces us to ask, why do some landscapes breed monsters of fur and muscle, while others conjure specters of teeth and ice? Described as a wolf on steroids, the Wahila stalks indigenous legends with a hulking, white-furred frame, paws the size of dinner plates, and a chilling habit of severing heads clean from their bodies. Inuit elders say it's not just an animal, it's a force of the land itself, a remnant of the Pleistocene era's dire wolves, adapted to survive where even the hardiest humans falter. The contrast with Bigfoot is stark. Where Sasquatch dwells in dense forests, the Wahila rules the tundra's blinding emptiness. While Bigfoot sightings often emphasize curiosity or stealth, Wahila encounters speak of raw predation, a creature that doesn't hide but hunts, leaving trails of blood in the snow. This isn't a coincidence. Environment shapes myth like a sculptor's chisel. In the Pacific Northwest, where ancient trees tower and shadows linger, a creature like Bigfoot makes sense, a shadow among shadows, glimpsed but never grasped. But the Yukon's endless white demands a different kind of monster. The Wahila's brutality reflects the land's indifference. It's not a guardian or trickster, but a reminder that nature here doesn't negotiate. Yet both creatures share a deeper thread. They fill the gaps in human understanding. For coastal tribes, Bigfoot explains strange noises in the night or footprints too large for bears. For the Inuit, the Wahila answered why caribou carcasses appeared ripped apart by no known predator. Modern sightings follow the same logic. In 1980, a trapper near the Nahanni River stumbled upon a set of wolf tracks, except they measured 6 inches across, spaced far enough to suggest a beast weighing over 200 pounds. Biologists dismissed it as a freak specimen, but locals knew better. The Wahila, they said, had passed through. Science offers plausible roots. Some researchers speculate the Wahila could be a relic population of Canis durus, the prehistoric dire wolf, or an offshoot of the Arctic's already massive timber wolves. Others point to the region's history of strange fauna, like the white bears, once dismissed as ghost stories until DNA confirmed them as a rare subspecies of grizzly. But as with Bigfoot, the Wahila's power isn't just in its possible existence, it's in what it represents. The Yukon doesn't just kill the unprepared, it erases them. A creature that thrives in such a place isn't just a predator, it's the wilderness made flesh. The next time you hear a howl echo across the snow, ask yourself, is it just the wind? Or something older, hungrier, waiting just beyond the edge of the firelight, while the Pacific Northwest has Bigfoot, and Canada has the Wahila. Florida's steamy swamps boast their own legendary beast, the skunk ape. This foul-smelling, shaggy-haired creature is no mere copycat. It's a product of its environment, as wild and untamed as the Everglades themselves, towering up to 7 feet tall with matted, reddish-brown fur and eyes that glow yellow in the dark. The skunk ape earns its name from one unmistakable trait: the putrid, rotten egg stench that lingers in its wake. Witnesses describe the odor as unbearable, a mix of wet dog, sulfur, and something far more primal. It's not just a detail, it's a warning. The most compelling evidence comes from a series of photos snapped in 2002 by an anonymous woman who claimed the creature had been lurking near her backyard in Sarasota County. The grainy images show a hunched, ape-like figure standing amidst palmettos, its reddish fur stark against the greenery. Skeptics dismissed it as a guy in a ghillie suit or an escaped orangutan, but the photos had eerie staying power. For one, the posture was all wrong for a human. Its arms hung too long, its shoulders too slumped. Then there's the context. Florida doesn't have wild primates, and no zoo reported a missing ape. The woman refused to give her name, fearing ridicule, but insisted the thing had been raiding her garbage for weeks before she managed to capture it on film. What sets the skunk ape apart from its northern cousins isn't just the smell, it's the behavior. Bigfoot sightings often describe a silent observer, but the skunk ape is bold, even confrontational. Reports from the 1970s tell of it pounding on trailer walls in the dead of night or tossing rocks at fishermen deep in the glades. In 1977, 2 teenagers camping near Ocho swore it chased their canoe, wading chest-deep through the swamp with terrifying speed. Locals have their own theories. Some Seminole elders whisper it's a shapeshifter, a relic of the ancient Sasquatch, or hairy people who walked the land long before settlers arrived. Others, like backwoods tour guides, joke it's just Florida's version of a bear. If bears reeked like a sewer and knew how to throw things, then there's the ecosystem itself. The Everglades are a perfect hideout for something that doesn't want to be found. Mangrove labyrinths, endless sawgrass prairies, and water too shallow for boats but too deep to wade create a no-man's land where secrets sink without a trace. Even seasoned rangers admit vast stretches remain unexplored, home to invasive pythons, ghost orchids, and possibly something far stranger. The skunk ape fits the terrain like a missing puzzle piece. Its alleged swamp stench could be camouflage, masking it from predators or prey. Its lanky build lets it navigate flooded trails where humans flounder. And unlike Bigfoot's forested domain, Florida's wetlands are littered with sinkholes and caverns, perfect for hiding a population of creatures smart enough to stay just out of frame. The skunk ape's cultural footprint runs deep. It's the star of local road signs, cheap souvenirs, and even a kitschy museum in Ocho stacked with plaster casts and blurry Polaroids. But beneath the tourist traps lies a real question. Why does Florida need its own monster? Maybe it's because the state itself is a liminal space, part paradise, part nightmare, where gators sunbathe on golf courses and hurricanes rewrite the map overnight. The skunk ape embodies that duality, equal parts joke and genuine mystery, a stinking reminder that even in the age of satellites, some corners of the map still read, "Here be monsters." In a place where the air hums with cicadas and the water hides bones, who's to say what's lurking just beyond the next bend in the trail? High in the thin air of the Himalayas, where glaciers gleam like shattered glass and storms roll in without warning, another legend walks the snow. The Yeti, called Migoi in Bhutan, Mete in Tibet, has haunted mountain passes for centuries, its story woven so deeply into local culture that some villages still hang carved wooden effigies above their doors to ward it off. To Westerners, it's often dismissed as the abominable snowman, a cousin to Bigfoot, but the truth is far more intriguing. These aren't just parallel myths, they're threads of the same global tapestry, each shaped by the land that birthed them. Take the Migoi of Bhutanese lore. Unlike Bigfoot's elusive forest presence, the Migoi is said to embody the mountains themselves, a being so powerful it can bend reality, disappearing into mist or leaving footprints that vanish mid-stride. Sherpas tell of its backwards feet, a trait shared with some Native American depictions of Sasquatch, meant to confuse hunters. Then there's the smell, rancid and musky, clinging to the air long after the creature has passed, mirroring reports from Florida's skunk ape to the Pacific Northwest. These aren't random overlaps, they're clues suggesting something deeper than coincidence. In 2017, a team from Oxford University tried to settle the debate with science. They analyzed dozens of alleged Yeti artifacts, bones, teeth, and tufts of fur collected from monasteries and hunters across the Himalayas. The results were definitive. Every sample matched known animals, from Himalayan brown bears to ancient canids. No unknown primates, no missing links, but here's the twist. The very same study revealed something unexpected. Some samples, like a relic from Bhutan, belonged to a genetic cousin of the polar bear, a subspecies thought extinct for 40,000 years. Could this explain the legends? A relic population of massive, light-furred bears glimpsed fleetingly in the snow, morphing into something more humanoid in the telling. The parallels to North America are striking. Just as the Yeti may have roots in misidentified bears, many classic Bigfoot sightings align eerily with known fauna. Grizzlies standing on hind legs, disoriented moose crashing through underbrush, even the infamous vocalizations attributed to Sasquatch often match the cries of foxes or the groaning of trees in wind. Yet the stories persist, evolving with each generation. A Nepalese shepherd who swears he saw a Migoi heal his wounded yak with a touch isn't just describing a bear, he's voicing a reverence for the mountain's hidden power. Similarly, when a logger in Oregon describes a Sasquatch leading him out of a blizzard, he's tapping into a primal need for the wild to be more than indifferent, to be alive, watching, even caring. What's truly fascinating isn't the divide between myth and biology, but how they feed each other. The Oxford study didn't kill the Yeti legend, it gave it new dimensions. Maybe the Migoi was never a literal creature, but a way to explain the unexplainable, the sudden avalanches, the eerie silences, the feeling of being followed where no human could survive. Sound familiar? It's the same primal whisper that turns a shadow in the redwoods into Sasquatch, a ripple in the swamp into the skunk ape. These stories aren't just about monsters. They're about us, the part of our minds that still jumps at rustling leaves, that wonders, just for a heartbeat, if the old tales might be true after all. And perhaps that's why the Yeti and Bigfoot endure, not as flesh and blood creatures, but as mirrors held up to the last wild places and to the people who dare to wander into them. In 2012, a research group called the Erickson Project claimed they'd cracked the Bigfoot mystery using cutting-edge science. Their premise: collect DNA from alleged Sasquatch hair, saliva, and tissue samples across North America, then sequence it to prove the species' existence. The team, led by a businessman named Adrian Erickson, partnered with credentialed geneticists and even released a documentary teasing their findings. But when independent scientists scrutinized their work, the cracks began to show. The project's collection methods were questionable. Samples came from sources like hunters who swore they'd shot a Sasquatch, yet never produced a body. Worse, the few genetic results made public matched known animals like bears and wolves, with no trace of an unknown primate. Critics pointed out that without peer-reviewed publication or transparent methodology, the Erickson project was little more than a slickly produced peer stunt, trading on the allure of science without delivering its rigor. Around the same time, another study exploded onto the scene. Dr. Melba Ketchum's bombshell claim that she'd sequenced Bigfoot DNA and found it was a human hybrid. Her 2013 paper, self-published in a dubious journal she allegedly created, argued Sasquatch was a cross between modern humans and an unknown hominid, possibly surviving Neanderthals. The scientific community recoiled. Geneticists flagged glaring errors, contaminated samples, inconsistent data, and statistical manipulations so egregious, one professor called it DNA astrology. Ketchum's refusal to share raw data only deepened suspicions. Even fellow cryptid researchers distanced themselves, noting her team's samples included everything from raccoon fur to human hair, with no chain of custody to prove origins. The study's most lasting impact, it became a cautionary tale about how not to conduct genetic research. The core issue with these projects isn't just flawed science, it's the erosion of trust. Every high-profile failure makes it harder for legitimate researchers to study cryptids without ridicule. Take Dr. Todd DeSotil, a NYU geneticist who's analyzed numerous Bigfoot samples. His work is meticulous, blind testing DNA, publishing in proper journals, and debunking hoaxes, but his findings, that every sample he's tested belongs to known species, get drowned out by flashier, shoddier claims. The pattern repeats. A team hypes revolutionary proof, media pounces, and when the dust settles, skeptics feel vindicated while believers cling to conspiracy theories about suppressed truths. Yet buried in the noise are glimmers of real science. The Oxford-Lausanne Collateral Hominid Project, for instance, took a rigorous approach collecting hair samples from credible sources, using double-blind testing, and openly publishing negative results. Their conclusion: no evidence of unknown primates, but that transparency, that willingness to say, "We didn't find it," is what separates science from spectacle. The irony is stark. The more desperately we chase proof of Bigfoot, the more elusive it becomes, not just in the woods, but in the lab. Maybe the real mystery isn't whether Sasquatch exists, but why we keep hoping science will confirm what legends have whispered for centuries. Trail cameras were supposed to be the game changer in the hunt for Bigfoot. Motion-activated, weatherproof, and capable of snapping crystal-clear images of deer, bears, and even poachers, these devices promised to capture what eyewitnesses couldn't: irrefutable proof. Yet decades of footage later, the best we've gotten are blurry blobs, distant shadows, and the occasional curious raccoon staring into the lens. The irony. The more cameras we deploy, the more elusive Bigfoot seems to become. In 2018, a team in Washington state set up over 100 trail cams across a hotspot where sightings had been reported for years. Not a single frame showed anything unexplained. Skeptics call this absence evidence of absence. Believers counter with a wild-card theory: maybe Bigfoot knows to avoid them. Some even claim the creatures emit infrasound that disrupts electronics, a convenient explanation for why technology keeps failing where human eyes supposedly succeed. Drones should have tipped the scales further. Equipped with thermal imaging and high-resolution zoom, they can scan miles of rugged terrain in hours, terrain that would take ground teams weeks to cover. In 2021, a group in British Columbia sent drones buzzing over old-growth forests where loggers swore they'd seen massive, bipedal figures. The thermal cameras picked up heat signatures, all-right elk, cougars, even a lost hiker, but nothing matching a 7-foot-tall primate. Then there's the infamous thermal blob footage from Oregon's Blue Mountains, where a shapeless heat mass moved through trees at dusk. The video went viral, hailed as a breakthrough until a wildlife biologist pointed out the movement patterns matched a black bear with uncanny precision. Artificial intelligence entered the fray with even grander promises. Projects like the Sierra Sounds analysis used machine learning to dissect alleged Bigfoot vocalizations, those deep, guttural recordings from the 70s. AI filters isolated frequencies, compared them to known animals, and even mapped cadences that hinted at structured communication. But here's the catch: the software could only analyze what was fed into it. Without a verified Sasquatch voiceprint for comparison, the results were speculative at best. In 2020, an MIT team trained an algorithm on thousands of hours of forest audio. When they played back anomalous sounds flagged by the system, most turned out to be wind, water, or a particularly vocal barred owl. So why does the search persist? Because every technological failure fuels a new workaround. When trail cams came up empty, hunters switched to silent, scent-masked setups. When drones failed to spot Sasquatch from above, researchers began scanning cave systems with LiDAR. AI's shortcomings led to crowdsourced analysis platforms where thousands of users sift through data, hoping human intuition might spot what machines miss. It's a cycle as old as the legend itself. Each dead end sparks a tweak in methodology, a refinement in gear, a fresh angle. The truth is, technology hasn't debunked Bigfoot, it's just raised the stakes. For every inconclusive thermal image, there's a true believer arguing the creature's fur insulates its heat signature. Every AI analysis that rules out an unknown primate is met with claims that Sasquatch vocalizations operate outside known biological parameters. The goalposts shift, but the game goes on, because in the end, the hunt isn't just about finding proof, it's about the thrill of the search itself, the idea that somewhere out there, in the quiet between the trees, something might still be watching back. Children have always been the most unsettling witnesses in the Bigfoot saga, not because they lie, but precisely because they don't grasp the weight of their words. Take the case of a 7-year-old boy in rural Ohio who, in 1998, bolted into his family's cabin screaming about a big, hairy monster peering through his bedroom window. His parents dismissed it as a nightmare until they found muddy handprints on the outside sill, far too large to belong to anyone in the valley. Or the group of scouts in British Columbia who swore they'd been followed by something that mimicked their laughter during a 2015 camping trip. Their counselor later discovered footprints circling their tents, each one twice the size of a grown man's boot. These stories hit differently because kids lack the filters adults develop. They haven't learned to doubt their eyes or bend memories to fit logic. When a child describes a creature with matted fur and eyes that glowed like fireflies, there's no hidden agenda, no fame-seeking, just raw, unfiltered terror. Yet that very innocence is also the problem. A child's imagination can transform a swaying branch into a lurking giant, or a distant owl call into a guttural growl. Psychologists call it magical thinking, the developmental stage where fantasy and reality blur. In 2011, a kindergarten teacher in Oregon documented her students' drawings after a field trip to the woods. Half the class sketched tall, shadowy figures watching them from the trees, eerily consistent, until she realized they'd been playing a game of Bigfoot tag earlier that week. The line between game and memory had vanished. Even more telling are cases where parents unknowingly seed the idea. A 2019 study in the Journal of Anomalous Psychology found that kids who'd heard family Sasquatch stories were 5 times more likely to see one in ambiguous forest photos compared to peers raised without the lore. But some encounters defy easy dismissal. In the Cherokee Nation, elders still speak of the Tsul Kalu appearing to children near sacred caves, leaving gifts like arrowheads or animal teeth, objects no toddler could fabricate. And then there's the eerie consistency of details across unrelated accounts. A girl in Maine and a boy in Washington, separated by thousands of miles and years, both described Bigfoot's hands as long like daddy's, but with dirt packed under the nails. Too specific to be coincidence, too strange to be coached. Even law enforcement takes notice when multiple kids independently report the same thing. In 2013, a Washington state trooper was dispatched after 3 siblings swore a smelly giant had been stealing apples from their tree. He found the branches snapped clean at 10 feet high, with prints leading into the woods, not bear, not human. The case remains open. Perhaps the most haunting aspect isn't whether these children saw something real, but how the encounters change them. A therapist who works with traumatized kids in Bigfoot hotspots recounts a patient who stopped speaking for months after an alleged sighting, communicating only through drawings of a figure with black fur and sad eyes. Another boy developed an uncanny ability to mimic animal sounds, insisting he'd learned them from the man in the trees. Skeptics argue these are coping mechanisms for mundane traumas, a bear attack, an abusive adult disguised as monsters. But when you sit with these kids, their fear doesn't feel invented. It feels earned. The irony is that children's testimonies, for all their flaws, might hold the key to unraveling the myth. They're the only witnesses without a script, no Patterson-Gimlin film or native folklore shaping their expectations. When a 4-year-old whispers that the thing outside her window didn't walk but tiptoed like a ballerina, it forces us to wonder, what if we've been imagining Bigfoot all wrong? Not as a beast or a spirit, but as something far harder to define, a shape that slips through the cracks of every theory, leaving only footprints in the mud and wide-eyed kids clutching their blankets, begging someone, anyone, to believe them. In the dense wilderness of America's national parks, people vanish without a trace, no broken branches, no distressed cries, just an eerie silence where a hiker or hunter once stood. These aren't just isolated incidents. They're part of a chilling pattern documented by former law enforcement officer David Paulides in his Missing 411 series. What's striking isn't just the disappearances themselves, but where they happen. Remote areas with steep terrain, near bodies of water, and in a detail that sends shivers down the spine, often in regions with decades of Bigfoot sightings. Could there be a connection, or is the world's most famous cryptid simply a convenient scapegoat for tragedies too baffling to explain? Paulides' research is meticulous. He catalogs cases where children reappear miles from their last known location, impossibly far for their tiny legs to carry them, or where seasoned outdoorsmen vanish in minutes, leaving gear neatly stacked as if they'd simply evaporated. In one infamous case from the Olympic Peninsula, a hunter named Gerald Osborne disappeared in 1981 near a hotbed of Sasquatch activity. Search teams found his rifle leaning against a log, boots placed neatly beside it, and no footprints leading away. Nearby, however, were impressions too large to be human, deep, deliberate depressions in the moss, as if something heavy had stood watching. Skeptics argue that linking these vanishings to Bigfoot is a leap too far. The wilderness is unforgiving, they say. Cliffs crumble, rivers surge without warning, and animals drag remains where searchers can't follow. Even Paulides avoids outright blaming Sasquatch, focusing instead on the bizarre consistencies, clusters of disappearances around boulder fields, sudden weather changes coinciding with vanishings, and the peculiar absence of clothing on many victims, details that defy typical animal predation or exposure scenarios. But when families of the missing grasp for answers, the legend looms large. In 2014, after a boy disappeared in the Smoky Mountains, his father tearfully told reporters, "Whatever took him wasn't natural. It knew the land better than we ever could." The most unsettling thread isn't just proximity to cryptid lore, it's behavior. Indigenous tribes have long spoken of Sasquatch as territorial, even vengeful, toward those who disrespect the wild. The Sasq'ets, for example, tell of hunters who overstepped boundaries and were never seen again, their fate attributed to the Sasq'ets judgment. Modern missing persons cases sometimes echo this theme. In Colorado's San Juan Mountains, a group of backpackers vanished in 2017 after a ranger warned them against venturing into a restricted area. When their tents were found slashed from the outside, locals muttered about the old ones enforcing rules older than park boundaries. Yet for every case that hints at something supernatural, there are mundane explanations. Hypothermia induces paradoxical undressing, giving the illusion of foul play. Flash floods erase tracks in minutes, and humans, tragically, are capable of atrocities that leave no immediate trail. The danger in blaming Bigfoot is that it risks overshadowing real threats, unmarked mine shafts, unstable terrain, or even human predators exploiting the wild's anonymity. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Bigfoot, whether flesh and blood or myth, has become a vessel for our collective unease with the unknown. When a child disappears without a whisper or a seasoned guide vanishes mid-step, the idea of a hidden intelligence in the wild offers a narrative more palatable than randomness. It's easier to blame a monster than accept that nature doesn't care if we come home. And in that space between fact and folklore, the disappearances persist, unexplained, unforgettable, and forever tangled with the question, if not Bigfoot, then what? There's something primal in the way we lean closer to the campfire when the story turns to Bigfoot, as if the flickering light might hold the creature's silhouette at bay. This isn't just about a missing link in the evolutionary chain, it's about a missing piece in the human psyche. Long before Sasquatch became a pop culture icon, cultures across the world told stories of giants, wild men, and shadowy beings lurking just beyond the village gates. The ancient Greeks had their satyrs, the Norse their trolls, and the indigenous peoples of the Americas their Sasq'ets and Tsul Kalu. These weren't just monsters, they were manifestations of the unknown, placeholders for the unexplainable gaps in the world. The digital age hasn't erased that need, it's amplified it. In an era where satellites map every inch of the globe and algorithms predict our next thought, Bigfoot represents the last gasp of wilderness resisting the grid. Think about it. We carry devices in our pockets that can identify a song from a hum or translate languages in real time. Yet something as massive as a 7-foot-tall primate supposedly eludes every camera, every drone, every thermal sensor. That contradiction is intoxicating. It whispers that the world isn't as tidy as we've been led to believe, that there are still places where the old rules don't apply. Psychologists call this the wilderness void, the subconscious longing for a world that isn't entirely tamed, catalogued, or controlled. Consider how differently we treat Bigfoot compared to other cryptids. The Loch Ness Monster is a quaint tourist trap, and chupacabras are relegated to late-night meme fodder, but Sasquatch, it's debated in documentaries, analyzed by ex-FBI agents, and hunted with military-grade optics. There's a gravity to it, a sense that proving its existence would do more than just add a new species to the taxonomy books. It would validate a deeper, older truth about the limits of human knowledge. Anthropologist Dr. David Diegling argues that Bigfoot persists because it's the perfect metaphor. It's not just an animal, it's a referendum on how much we're willing to admit we don't know. This isn't just speculation, it's etched into our behavior. Notice how most sightings occur not in untouched wilderness, but in the liminal spaces where civilization frays at the edges. The logging roads of the Pacific Northwest, the Appalachian hollows where cell service dies, the Florida swamps where GPS glitches, these are the zones where modernity stumbles, where the illusion of control cracks just enough to let the old stories back in. A hiker who'd roll their eyes at ghosts or aliens might still pause when the forest goes silent, because Bigfoot isn't just a creature, it's the embodiment of the wild's unanswered question, what if you're not alone out here? The most telling evidence of all might be what happens when we stop looking. In 2019, a team of ecologists studying wolverines in British Columbia accidentally captured trail cam footage of a tall, bipedal figure shrouded in mist. The image was debunked within hours, a bear standing on a log, distorted by rain, but for a brief window, the internet erupted, not with ridicule, but with hope. Because in that blurry, unverified frame, people saw something they'd been missing, a world where mystery still had room to breathe. That's the real magic of Bigfoot. It doesn't need to be real to be true. It just needs to remind us that the map still has edges, and beyond them, the wild things wait. From the misty forests of the Pacific Northwest to the flickering glow of campfire tales, Bigfoot's shadow stretches across centuries, part creature, part cultural mirror. We've traced its origins through indigenous folklore, where the Sasqu'ets Sasq'ets wasn't just a monster, but a guardian, a teacher woven into the land itself. We've followed its transformation under European settlers, who reframed these beings as threats or curiosities, stripping away sacred context for headlines and hoaxes. We've watched science grapple with the absence of bones, the impossibility of a hidden breeding population, and yet we can't shake the question, not just, is it real? But why won't this story die? The evidence, or lack thereof, speaks volumes. Trail cameras capture nothing but static. DNA tests yield bare hair and human pranks. Drones scan endless wilderness and find only what we expect, and yet the sightings persist. The footprints, the howls, the chilling sense of being watched in places where the trees grow too thick for light to penetrate. Maybe it's pareidolia, our brains tricking us into seeing faces in the fog. Maybe it's the ghost lineage hypothesis, a whisper of Gigantopithecus clinging to life in some forgotten valley. Or maybe, as the Hoopa elders warned, some truths aren't meant to be caught on camera. Bigfoot's real power lies in what it reveals about us. It's the thrill of the uncharted, the itch at the back of our necks when the map runs out. In a world where satellites see everything, Bigfoot is the last great shrug of the wild, the possibility that we haven't figured it all out yet. It's no accident that sightings spike where civilization frays, logging roads, dead zones, places where the wife I cuts out and the old stories creep back in. So here's the real mystery, the one that lingers after the debates over blurry photos and fake footprints fade. Is Bigfoot out there, or is it us who need him to be? A remnant of the untamed, a placeholder for the unknown, a reminder that the woods can still make fools of our certainty. Drop your thoughts below. Have you ever felt that prickling sense of something just beyond the tree line? And if you're hungry for more mysteries, hit subscribe. The wild isn't done with us yet.